Alright, the first thing we're going to look at is how to solve a quadratic by doing what's called taking a square root. Before we do any of that, let's just review a little bit what it means to solve an equation. So let's take this equation. 4x plus 5 equals 149, and let's solve it. This is pure review, nothing new here. We take 5 and we subtract that from both sides so that this 5 will disappear and move over here. And when we do that, we get 4x equals 144. Now, we want to get this x by itself, so we take this 4 and divide both sides by 4. And when we do that, we end up with x being 36. So what we've done here is we've solved this equation. We found some number that we can replace x with, that we can substitute in for x to make the statement true. And in fact, that's all it means to solve an equation. Isolate the variable on one side of the equation and you will find what number has to make that equation true. So again, what we're seeking is to get the variable by itself on one side, and then it'll automatically tell us what number makes it true on the other side, and that's called isolating the variable. So let's do this again, but let's change one thing. Now, instead of it being 4x plus 5, let's do 4x squared plus 5 equals 149. Now, to start with, nothing changes here. We're still going to subtract 5 from both sides. We're still going to divide by 4. But now we're left with this situation where we have x squared equals 36. Now, in order to figure out what x is, we have to get this x by itself. So let's take a closer look at this. And the question is, how in the world do we get rid of this squared term right here? We've got x squared equals 36, but we want to know what x equals. So just to remind you, x squared means x times x equals 36. We're looking for some number that when you multiply it by itself gives you 36. And in order to undo this, to figure out what x is, we can't use anything that we've done so far. There's no amount of addition, subtraction, multiplication, or division that's going to make this work. We need something completely new. And that something completely new is called taking a square root. So we need to take the square root of that x squared, and what that does is that undoes the exponent on there. So when we raise something to the second power, taking the square root of that undoes that. So if we look at this, if we take the square root of x squared, that gives us x. And this funny looking check mark here is our symbol for taking the square root of something. So again, the square root of x squared equals x. It undoes that squaring. This symbol, the one that kind of looks like a check mark, we call a radical. Alright, so now back to our original equation, or I guess our second equation, the x squared equals 36. We want to change this x squared to just an x to figure out what x is. So in order to do that, we're going to take the square root of x squared. But what we do to one side, we have to do to the other. So I know what the square root of x squared is. That's just going to be x. So now the question becomes, what is the square root of 36? And this is fortunately something that we can just do on our calculator. You can plug that in, and I'll show you in a different video what that kind of looks like. And when you plug this into your calculator, what you're going to find is that the calculator will tell you that the square root of 36 is 6. And that's half true, but it's not all true. When you take the square root of this, you get two answers. X could be 6, because 6 times 6 gives you 36. But x could also be negative 6, because negative 6 times negative 6 also gives you 36. So we have two options for our answer. And in order to write that not as two things, so basically to avoid having to write our two different solutions, we can write it like this. We can say x is equal to plus or minus 6. That means x could be positive 6 or x could be negative 6. So when we solve an equation by doing this, we're going to get two solutions. We're going to get a positive number and a negative number. So just sum up here, if we're taking the square root of a positive number, you're going to get two solutions, one positive and one negative. There are two situations that can change that a little bit though. If you're taking the square root of 0, 0 isn't really positive or negative. So the square root of 0 is just going to give you one solution, and that solution is always 0. So when you take the square root of 0, you get 0 and nothing else. So that's the situation where you'll get one answer. And if you try and take the square root of a negative number, you are going to get answers, but they're answers that we're not really going to talk about in this class much. What you can say is that you're not going to get any real solutions. So to back up and sum all this up, if you're taking the square root of a positive number, you're going to get two solutions. If you take the square root of 0, you're going to get one solution, which will be 0. And if you take the square root of a negative number, you're not going to get any real solutions. So what we're going to look at as we go forward is how to actually take problems that include this and get some solutions for it. You can see those in the worked example problems. This video is just to give you some understanding of where we're going. So again, we're solving equations just like we did before, but now we're adding this extra square root to get rid of our squared term.